Okay, so good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thank you for watching DevRel Asia 2020 interview sessions. I'm Atsushi, head organizer of the conference. In this time, I will introduce our awesome speakers and chat with them about their talk in 15 minutes. Today's guest is Don Goodman-Wilson at Katsudon.tech. Welcome, Don.
Hello, Atsushi. It's
And
really nice to
long
be.
time no see. Really, really long time no see. And how are you?
It's been almost a year, I think, since
Yes.
DevRel London.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. The weather's been lovely here in Amsterdam. Yeah, and I'm
Mm.
glad to be here.
Okay. So at first, please introduce yourself and your careers, and what is your favorite technologies, food, movie, books, or anything about you.
All right. Um, I'm Don. I have been doing developer relations for several years now. I've lost track. I began my career in developer relations when I moved from the platform engineering team at Slack to their then new developer relations team. And I have since worked doing developer relations for a number of startups, including some European startups, which has been a lot of fun, most recently for GitHub. I now run and operate a developer relations consultancy, Katsudon.tech, um, because Don, and I like rice bowls. Um, yeah, my favorite technologies. I have been programming in C and C++ for 20, 25 years, and I really enjoy those still. I keep making excuses for why I haven't started learning about Rust, but Rust is next on my list of technologies to work on. Yeah, I enjoy photography and model trains and fountain pens, and I really enjoy sharing my passion for building a more ethical world using open source with others, which is what I'm going to do in the talk that I'm giving for DevRel Asia.
I see. So I don't have any ideas. Do you work at Slack? So it's almost same with Imura-san.
Mm.
She's your coworkers, right?
Yes, yes. Our time at
Mm.
Slack didn't quite overlap, but yes.
I see. I see. And I want to know about your organization, DevRel Salon. So,
Mm.
what is that?
So the DevRel Salon is a meetup that I started when I
Mm,
first moved to Paris 3 or 4 years ago now. It's there were in Paris. I noticed a lot of companies doing developer tools, developer products, but the idea of developer relations was still relatively new to the Parisian startup scene. And there were people who were practicing developer relations, but there was no professional network for developer relations professionals. And so I started the salon to bring together professionals, to build the network, to share expertise, and to encourage other companies in the area that were building developer tools to think about the kinds of things that we as developer advocates think about all the time,
mm,
and encourage them to engage um, in developer relations like activities. It
mm.
has since expanded to Amsterdam. I run nominally a DevRel salon here in Amsterdam as well, now that I have moved to Amsterdam. With the beginning of the pandemic, it's all gone quite quiet.
Mhm.
It was always a very low budget affair in the first place. So
Mm.
um, we didn't really have the time or resources to figure out an alternative to what we usually did, which was meet on the terrace of a bar or cafe and
Mm.
talk informally, or in the offices of a startup somewhere. All of that went right out the window. So when the Stark season of disease is over, we'll figure out how to start that back up, perhaps.
I see. So most of Japanese community name using Meetup or user groups for their communities, but the salon
Mhm.
is, I think, it's very cool name for
Mm.
professional networks. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea was we run meetups for our day job. None of us want to run a meetup for fun on the side.
Mm.
And so the model is loosely based on the idea of the intellectual salon in 19th century Paris, because I was in Paris. Everybody wants to have a salon in Paris. Um, but the idea was very simple. We would meet and we would talk and we would
Mm.
talk shop and have conversations and try to take notes on the conversations and share those with the other people who came to the talk or came to the meeting, I should say, came to the salon. It came to have a little more structure. We would have an invited guest, uh, but no talk. They were
Mm.
just there to lead the conversation, talk about their own experiences, share those with everybody around them, um, and with no particular conversational direction in mind,
Mm.
just to share knowledge and expertise.
I see. It's just a network of professional developer relations, right?
Yes.
Cool. So, can I ask about your careers on GitHub? So, what is your role and what to do that?
So when I was at GitHub, I was on the developer relations team, of course, which for GitHub was something we struggled to figure out while I was there. What the role of developer relations is in a developer tool as sprawling and diverse as GitHub is. Um, what I ultimately found my niche doing was creating a program that encouraged other engineers to go out and give talks about the engineering work that they were doing,
Mm,
to reach out to their own personal communities. Maybe it's the Ruby community because GitHub is built
mm.
on Ruby. They have a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
Rubyists
yeah.
there. Or maybe it's the Rust or the C++ communities, right? People working on Git directly, as well as helping to organize events like GitHub Universe and GitHub Satellite.
Mm, 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 mm.
Uh, of
I
course, as you
see.
know, I left GitHub a year ago because of their contract with the American Immigrations and Customs Enforcement
Mm,
Organization.
mm, mm, mm. I see. So I think GitHub is a company that loves open source softwares, and you also joined to the Maintainability Foundation, right?
Mm.
Mm,
Maintainerati Foundation. Maintainerati itself is an event for open source maintainers. It
mm,
was started well before I joined the organization, but on a fairly informal basis.
mm,
Um, and the idea is to find open source maintainers in different parts of the world and bring them together to have
mm,
a conversation. Again, just like with the salon, there are no talks.
mm,
Instead, Maintainerati events are run as an unconference where the
mm,
attendees set the agenda. The attendees decide in the moment what it is that they want to talk about and
mm,
self organize into groups. The key
mm,
thing is that for each conversation that happens, we take careful notes. And
mm,
we take those
mm,
notes and we analyze them and we distill lessons
mm,
that the
mm,
maintainers have shared with us and with each other to gain a better understanding and better insight into what the open source maintainer community needs.
mm,
The last one we ran was in Berlin in April of 2019.
mm,
Once again, we had big plans for spreading these globally in 2020 that were thwarted. And it's the kind of event that we could do it virtually. We might still be able to do it virtually, but it really benefits from having people together in the same room, because you have to have a bond of trust with the people who are sitting around you to have the kinds of candid conversations that we
Yeah.
want people to have at this kind of event. They
Mm,
need to feel like it's a safe space to have a conversation, because even though we're taking notes,
mhm,
everything is anonymized. So nobody
mm,
knows who said what at these meetings,
yeah.
right?
I see. So I think you involved to the open source softwares so long time. So we will move to the next topic about your talk. So I think your passions uh, append to this talk title, open source is more than license. It's a very important thing. So in Japan, so many people long, misunderstanding the open source is public source software is open source. So every time open source is not. So we have to explain about that. So please talking about your talk abstracts or summary.
Yes. So I'm very interested in learning more about the perceptions of open source and the structure of open source communities in China, in Japan, and other countries in Asia. So I can only speak from my experience in the United States and in Europe. Um, and there's a frequent trope that you find, especially on Twitter, on Reddit, on Hacker News, that open source is defined in terms of the license that you attach to the piece of software, which I think is a very curious kind of thing, considering that um, open source in its current phase began its life as a model for how to develop software. Um, what was seen as particularly radical about Linux, the kernel, for example, was not that it was licensed in a particular way, but that it fostered a very collaborative, very open, very community driven model of development. And I think in many ways we've lost sight of this. People will often shout down claims of whether or not something is open source based on whether their license fits the open source definition as provided by the open source initiative. And I think this is an extremely narrow view of what open source is. And I think it really misses the forest for the trees. Open source began as almost a political movement. Well, not almost a political movement, it's always been a political movement about embedding the lives of people who don't have a lot of power. Um, and while at first those lives were largely concerned with a homogenous group of white men, um, open source has expanded globally. And very few people on this planet live their lives untouched in some way by open source software. And so in developer relations, we're responsible for creating a lot of corporate open source programs. When we build our open source programs, I think it's really important for us to think about, like, what does this mean for the wider community? How can we engage with them in a way that's meaningful? How can we build a community that not only leaves us with better software, but actually leaves the world in a better place than we found it? And I think that's really at the essence of what open source software is. But to do that, we have to move past this idea that the license is the defining characteristic of open source. And I want to go into some real depth in my talk this weekend about what that means.
I see. It's so deep stories. Like, yeah, it's yeah. So we have uh, we have to respect contributors, and we have to talk with them with very carefully. So sometimes text chat makes problem each other's, and uh, some programmers is has correct answer in themselves. So fighting each other's, oh, this method is good, or this variable name is so bad. So every time programmer fight each other. So, but your talk uh, recommend the have to respect each other's and grown up open source softwares.
Hmm.
It's
Yes,
very deep. Yeah.
but it's not just the contributors too, right? It's the users of the software, which are often not the contributors, and the people whose lives are impacted by the software, which can be a surprisingly wide group of people,
Mm,
that we often don't take their interest into account when we design our open source programs.
mm,
And the licensing question discourages us from thinking about the impact that our software has on the contributors, on the users, and on the rest of the world. And
mm,
so I think if we can move beyond this focus on licensing and start to answer these other kinds of questions,
mm,
we can have a much richer, much more productive open source ecosystem.
mm. I see. So in Japan, we have a problem. So there is no so much contributors for like develop something and translation something and the maintenance documents. So
Mm,
we have no people to contribute the open softwares. So
mm.
I want to every developers listen your talk.
That's a very interesting thing that I didn't know. Um, do you have a sense of why so few people contribute to open source in Japan?
Some people said we are workaholic, so they don't have a time to
Mm,
contribute so softwares.
interesting. Uh-huh, I see. I see. Yeah, that would be a really lovely topic for a future maintainer audio.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. Okay, so yeah, today's interview is done because we are already over the time, right? Okay, sorry. I want to listen your talk a lot more, but I will listen your talk on 14th for the conference. So and
Yes,
I hope you will enjoy the conference too.
I'm
So
sure that I will.
there is so many stories and from China and Korea, Japan, and the South Asia. Yeah. So I hope you will enjoy the conference. S- So
I'm very
and
much looking forward to it.
yes. So and in this time, interview is done. Our conference, DevRel Asia 2020, will be held on the November 14th. Uh, every watching people, save the date and waiting the date. Okay, everyone, see you next interview.